From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Dylan the Tennessee Pal Fagan. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Fellow conspiracy realists, friends, and neighbors, if you are listening to our strange news segment the week or the day it publishes, let us be the first to welcome you to Monday, March 24th. How's it going, guys? How are we feeling?
Welcome to the middle of the film. Sorry, that's Monty Python. It's going good. I'm feeling like a giant nerd today, as usual.
Nice. I am just, for some reason, craving Nutella. I just want Nutella right now. I don't know why.
Oh, because of the palm craving.
Yeah.
Probably that.
What's the deal with palm oil? Palm oil bad, right? We don't like palm oil because it's, I think, isn't it harvested like historically by slave labor in South America?
Well, I mean, if you hate orangutans, then palm oil is awesome.
Oh, yeah, look, it's got palm oil in it.
Yeah. No, we are not here to exclusively ruin wholesome good things, but maybe we pop the top on this one by giving everybody some strange news that may confirm some of our fellow listeners' firsthand experiences. It may also be a nice whatever the opposite of a palate cleanser is to our earlier episode on social media. What's the opposite of a palate cleanser, you guys?
Eating a lot of food.
A flavor bomb.
There you go. Flavor explosion.
Okay. Yeah. A palate blocker. So
a palate annihilator.
Yeah. A palate stymier. All right. Here's the news that broke. Financial Times covered it. Gizmodo covered it. Futurism covered it. Human intelligence does appear to be sharply declining depending upon how human intelligence is measured. What do we mean by this? Assessments from multiple institutions are showing that people across demographics and across age groups are having trouble concentrating, losing reasoning, problem solving, critical thinking, and information processing skills. So the way that they are measuring intelligence in these studies does appear to confirm some of the things that we discussed in our episode on social media versus attention span. But I think, Noel, you raised a really salient point that's been on everybody's mind earlier, which was perhaps cognitive processing ability. It's not necessarily, part of it is atrophy, but it's not necessarily disappearing.
Being shifted, right?
It's being shifted, or it's transforming to other priorities in the great mystery box called the human brain.
Do you remember that story we covered either here or on Ridiculous History about like the decline of intelligence during the Roman Empire, likely attributed to lead? Yeah. I don't think we can blame lead for this necessarily.
Well, silicon.
There you go. Plastic in our balls.
Brominated. Everything. Yeah, we can say that there are chemical substances that definitely, especially in formative years for humans, they can affect cognition. They can affect later things like impulse control and critical thought. This goes to here. Let's cite a few sources as we kick it off. We'll go to Noor Al-Sabai, writing for Futurism, who points out the University of Michigan's Monitoring the Future study looked at what they call concentration difficulty of 18-year-old people in America, and then
40-year-old people in America. I can relate. Concentration is hard.
Yeah,
and getting harder, it seems.
And they said, look at these other studies, like the Program for International Student Assessment, or that's a standing institution, their whole deal is to measure learning skills of adolescents around the world. And after years of research, really deep research, they found that people seem to universally be struggling with reduced attention spans and weakening critical thinking skills. Just in 2022, the pandemic was a game changer for us. In 2022, the National Endowment for the Arts found that just 37.6% of Americans, U.S. residents, said they'd read a novel or a short story in 2021. Yeah.
Remember I told you, Ben, that on our trip to the Middle East, I was really hoping to read a whole book. And so I bought the 2024 collection of the best American short stories.
Yeah.
I am proud to reveal that I did read the foreword, the introduction, and one story in 30 hours of flying.
And you said the first story was good.
Very good. It was called The Magic Bangle, and I highly recommend it. And I'm really looking forward to digging in because I figured, maybe this is good advice for anybody that's struggling with this. I just kind of figured, like, we read a lot of bite-sized stuff. I really want to finish a book, so why not read a book full of bite-sized stuff?
Yeah, and some of the world's best novels are written in that way. For instance, a great debate covering the things they carried is whether that should be evaluated as a cohesive novel or whether it's a series of interrelated short stories. And what is life, really, except for a series of interrelated short stories? Yeah. With that, folks, we do not abjure, but we do encourage you to spend some time in deep thought. To take some time and I'll be honest here as everybody's accountability buddy. I have to put my phone away now when I read because it's so normalized. We're so acclimated to always having a thing that we check just in case something new has happened.
It's that dopamine casino we carry around in our pockets. Like I actually recently invested in one of those mag charger things that sits by my bed. So when I charge my phone now, I put it on that thing and close the door on the other side of the house. I've been trying to listen to records and just be more intentional with the stuff I do and try not to think about that thing. And it's working to a degree, but it's still not easy. I do feel that drive to go check it in the other room.
Can we pause for a moment?
Mm-hmm.
Vocabulary word of the day, abjure. Please let us know.
Abjure?
Yeah.
Does that mean kind of like to poo-poo something? Like to speak negatively or to reject?
It means to, it's like to renounce.
Here we go. That wasn't far. That wasn't far. The mark.
Disavow. So I should have used admonish.
That's more of a finger wag. That's more of a no, right?
No. We just some of us don't know words, and now we know them.
it's very, so we don't.
We're not. The point is, we're not yelling at you. We're not yelling at ourselves.
No,
but we're all working toward this, and we'd love to hear from fellow conspiracy realists who are in charge of younglings. How do you handle the screen time? How do you handle the creation of capacity for critical thinking and deep thought? While you're doing that, we're going to give you a cavalcade of somewhat related stories. We're going to talk about eggs, of course. We're going to follow up on Purdue Pharma. We're going to finally catch up with Satan's disciples. We'll talk about disclosure. We got some shout outs to the ends of the earth, literally, a story we've all been following in Antarctica, a story we've been following in space. But before we do any of that, before we even pause for a word from our sponsors, I'd like to posit to you guys the following. Would you live in a city that had less rule of law, but more potential to use science to improve your life?
I answer that question by citing an incredible take I just heard from Ezra Klein talking about all this, idea of increasing government efficiency. And his critique was, I'm all about government efficiency, but the question is towards what end? Efficiency towards what? And he just feels like the current administration's vision of the future sucks because it does not involve the things that you're talking about, Ben. And it sort of abjures science and technology and seems to have a bit of a retrograde attitude towards that. So I would love to live in a place where all that stuff is more appreciated.
All right. Well, we'll go to an ad break and we will introduce you to the not quite new idea of freedom cities. And we have returned. Do you guys remember the old song? What was it? 16 Tons, the company store song?
Of course. We reference it often.
What do you get? That is entirely about the U.S. practice, or, the worldwide practice in the past of a community that is run by not a state, not a government entity, but instead by a private entity, by a corporation. This encounters all kinds of weird stuff like pain and script, or having debts that are purposely structured such that you can never really get back into the black ink. We've all heard stories about that. I think we did a few episodes on Ridiculous History that touch on the idea of company towns, didn't we?
Oh, we
did one on here for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. We did on here. I mean, just the idea of, I don't know, just, it's funny too, with the discussion we recently had about Scam Factory, that's almost an extension of that, but even more abusive, I would argue. Just the idea of you're captive, you are beholden to these overlords of one type or another, and you are using currency that they determine the value of.
Mm-hmm. Well, great news for any fans of terrible historical precedent. There is a lobbying group right now active in the United States called the Freedom Cities Coalition. The Freedom Cities Coalition is currently meeting with officials from the present U.S. administration to push for the creation of what are called Freedom Cities. Now, first off, that's a great name. The idea is that you could create tech hubs exempt from all those pesky taxes and red tape regulation to get away from all these federal laws that stop us from doing what current society would call highly unethical things like anti-aging clinical trials, nuclear reactor startups, different kind of construction that's not bound by all these, busy-minded bureaucrats, right?
Well, I feel like a dummy because when you teased this topic earlier and asked the question, I thought it was a good thing. I thought we maybe wanted to live in a place where more science and technology was, valued and pushed forward. But I guess you're talking about like unchecked, potentially problematic science and technology.
Mm-hmm. And back in 2023, current U.S. President Donald Trump kind of pitched the idea of creating 10 freedom cities. The hardcore proponents of this will call them startup nations. And their concept is, or their pitch is, that if you didn't have the FDA or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission or the Environmental Protection Agency, the bad guys from Ghostbusters 1, that you would be able to jumpstart all sorts of innovation, and you could really put some gas in the tank there. They're hoping currently, this lobbying group, to have legislation drafted and ready to sign by the end of 2025. If you'd like to read more about this, you can check out an excellent article over on Wired. Big thanks to Caroline Haskins and Victoria Elliott, who wrote this on March 7th, 2025. Startup Nation groups say they're meeting Trump officials to push for deregulated freedom cities. I got to tell you, it smells a lot like company towns with a new skin put on them, you know?
Boy, oh boy.
Very strange.
And just to say again, like the sales pitch of this sounds great. And I was certainly taken by it because, just full disclosure, I was not familiar with the story, and I'm kind of learning about it in real time with everybody. But the way it sounds on paper, I'm cool with. But then you start digging into this company store aspect and this deregulation situation, it starts to feel a little more sketchy.
Yeah, that's the thing too. We see precedent not just in the idea of a company town, but we also see precedent in what are called special economic zones. These are things in other countries that have their own sort of bubbled rule of law and regulation. Right now, for instance, you can go to places like the island of Rotan in Honduras. They are home to a place called Prospera, which sounds like, a pharmaceutical product. We'll get to the Sacklers later tonight. Prospera, the place, has been attracting a bunch of tech workers and startups by promising very low taxes, no regulations, a very business-friendly government. And it's the philosophical difference. This is another old episode we did on ridiculous history. The philosophical difference is treating the public as civilians or citizens versus consumers or customers. And that's an episode that is worth a listen, regardless of whether you're very pro freedom cities or you're very anti-freedom cities. We've given you what the champions of this think. The people who are critics of this argue that existing in a place like this will remove the right of consent and will remove all sorts of the typical democratic rights of the public. So I'm wondering where we stand on this. By the way, the Honduran Congress and the Honduran government is kind of internally at odds on the idea of Prospera. The citizens don't love it. They say it increases wealth disparity and poverty. The former president of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, he loved Prospera. Maybe arguably because he was already at the top of the socioeconomic hierarchy, but he gave them a permanent charter. And it wasn't until 2022 that Congress came back and said, look, we can't have this going on. This is bad for the people of Honduras, the people who can't afford to move from the area that is now Prospera. I don't know. There's an ongoing lawsuit as we record, and it's Prospera suing the Honduran government. We have to wonder, is this a one-off? Is this a precedent? Would we talked about this in an episode or in Strange News a while back. Do you guys think the United States would ever have new company towns?
Well, I think, okay, so in the situation with Prospera, it came into form in 2013, right? Mm-hmm. And like 4 years before that, there was a pretty big coup situation. Mm-hmm. And then a couple years later, like a whole truth and reconciliation situation there mm-hmm. in Honduras. And that instability created the right political and economic climate for these folks to move in and create Prospera, right? So it does feel... Well, and what they are suing, right? Because yes. the new government is basically saying, this is a bad idea, guys.
Yeah.
And Prospera says, oh, yeah, we're going to sue you for $10 billion, which would cripple your entire country.
Everybody raise your pinkies.
Yeah. Wait a minute. But like, aren't these things staffed by like highly educated and specialized individuals who like have a lot of other opportunities available to them? Like they're not, forcing people to work in these situations, right? I mean, I'm just trying to understand.
Not yet, but it's kind of like Sesame Credit. It always starts as an opt-in thing until the choice that you have is later removed.
Yes.
Right.
So what I'm seeing here, Ben, is the thing you've been warning about for I don't even know how many years, this concept that potentially there will be a new country of sorts formed in one of these places, right? A new economic zone that then, let's say, maybe successfully sues its parent country
and
or the
takes
country
over,
that is
stages a coup.
and then that becomes the new thing that everybody has to now vote between either the government or somebody who represents the government, or hey, this new Prospera place or this new Freedom Corporation.
Right. Yeah, the new region of southwestern North Oklahoma, brought to you by MeUndies and Exxon.
And Alphabet.
Well, it doesn't seem too far off from like the kind of technocracy that we're finding ourselves in with, like, you know, the unelected billionaire Elon Musk kind of running so many key parts of the government, seemingly to the interests of his own companies to a certain degree. And you got to wonder, is a company big enough at a certain point and installed enough in a government that they then, you know, kind of flout the rules and basically take over? I don't know. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's the precedent that critics are prognosticating, predicting, and fearing. You know, if we go to folks like Trey Goff, Goff, the chief of staff of Prospera, then we'll see that everybody is agreeing there is some sort of conspiracy afoot. It's just the champions of Freedom Cities feel like they're conspiring to make a better world, and the critics feel like these guys are conspiring to engineer a new form of neo-feudalism, right? A dark technocracy. If we go just a little bit further on this, please check out freedomcitiescoalition.com. That is the website of the lobbying group that we're mentioning. And our pal Trey from Prospera says, look, our group has already briefed officials at the White House on not just the concept of freedom cities, but 3 ways to create them. One is through what they would call interstate compacts. 2 or more states set aside territories with the same kind of bubble tax and regulatory policy. And then, under existing law, these interstate compacts are very tough to revoke. You can dissolve them, but it's like, you know, it's like how it's tough to rescind an amendment in Congress. Once you get an amendment in, you have to have a huge majority of people in legislation to take it out. It's a sneaky way to get it into federal law. The other options are creating federal enclaves with special economic zones, or, and this might be the most plausible option, having the White House, whomever controls it, issue executive orders to create a city one by one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
It's making me think about that giant swath of land that was purchased out in California that we talked about.
Yeah.
Or Elon Musk's compound outside of Austin, Texas, you know?
And then it gets tricky because if we're talking about private industries assuming something very close to the role of government, we have to ask ourselves, are those private industries going to be U.S. based, or are they going to be industries from a foreign country that maybe doesn't have the same division
regulatory
between,
structure?
Between like private and public.
Oh, 100%. And
tariffs on the freedom cities.
Well, can I just say though, if you go to prospera.co, the background image is like a video. It's the most sci-fi looking, kind of culty, almost, you know, idyllic future city kind of pitch that I've ever seen. And there's so much crypto content in it. And you got to imagine too that a lot of these free cities or freedom cities would be, it would be proposed that they would use the new currency. You know what I mean? Like, sure. I just feel like that's sort of on the
script.
Kind of. I mean, like that's 100%. A big thing about like questions about how the government is going to start investing Social Security or whatever if they dismantle it, is this idea that they might start making risky bets in, like, you know, speculative cryptocurrencies. We
need a White Lotus season in Prospera. Let's do it.
Yeah, and we'll have Prospera produce it, I'm sure. So this is the issue on the table for many of us in the crowd. You might already be thinking ahead. Like there are nobody likes to mention this, but there are objectively scientific innovations that could occur much faster were humanity not practicing a code of ethics. Were there not hard regulations about human experimentation and so on, there would be a horrifically high rate of attrition for a lot of things. But overall, arguably, you would arrive at some breakthroughs faster than you would under the current regimen of rules.
I don't know, man. The more I'm watching this Prospero video loop, the more it seems pretty nice. You got healthcare, dental, a commissary, green spaces, a pickleball court. What else do you want? I'm down. You can do some human experiments on me if I get to play pickleball for free.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a problem in a freedom city, then it's kind of like having a problem as an employee of a corporation. That's another fear. You won't have a day in court. You might go to an arbitration board. And if you don't step right, as we used to say, then you could have consequences with no avenue for things like appeal, no avenue for things like habeas corpus, and so on, because the federal government would then have to, whatever that overall government is, would have to figure out how they interact with this increasingly autonomous nation state. There's a great graphic novel called Lazarus. For anybody who likes graphic novels, it explores the dystopian end spectrum of corporate-run global government. And in that, there are three demographics, or there are a few companies that rule the world, right? Regions thereof. In those places, there are three demographics. There's the family, the ruling class. There's what are called the serfs, which are the skilled workers. And then everybody else is called waste. And the waste can disappear at a moment's notice. Their rights are severely curtailed. Their avenue or access to information is highly limited. And that, while that is science fiction, and it's a great graphic novel series, it does, I would argue, speak to some real world concerns, especially now, in the US, where 48 New Mexico residents have just disappeared. And ICE doesn't know where they are. ICE's lawyers don't know where they are. Everybody's ignoring the fact that people are ghosting in the US without their consent.
Dude, imagine a physical place on this planet where autonomous security drones / robots will be in place for the first time. Can you imagine a country or a state or a city where that will happen? I can't imagine one that has a government. Like literally, I cannot imagine a place on this earth that would do that, except an entrepreneur-based freedom city.
Guys, they have a scuba shop. There's a scuba shop on the premises. Come on.
I can imagine that easily happening with a overarching structure that calls itself the government. Sort of like how your substitute teacher might show up in class, and
put on a video.
Bunch of rules. Yeah. We are going to move on for time, but with this, we would also naturally see an erosion of privacy, which reminds us of one last golden apple to toss in the chat before we move to the sponsor. Folks, one day, one evening, 1 year, 1 decade soon, we will hopefully be correct about something good. Yet again, we come to you to say we correctly predicted something bad. Amazon has removed the privacy option for all of its neat little recording devices. So all Alexa recordings will now immediately go to the cloud. You have been decision treed away yet again from a choice that you thought you were always going to be able to make.
Alexa, stop spying on me.
No, I got in trouble for doing that joke earlier. Like, who was it? It was a few years back. We did.
Oh, well, we did we did a bunch of them in a row. I just did one, guys. Come on. And Alexa's talking to me, and she says she can't do that, Dave.
Right. She could at least learn your name.
I know, it's true.
But Everyone be careful. We want to hear your thoughts on all of this. Especially, we want to hear from people who are very anti or very pro Freedom City. Do you think this would actually happen? Do you think this is a company town? Or do you think there is a net positive to removing all those regulations? Conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and we'll return with more strange news.
And we're back. I'm going to jump right in by way of an update. Purdue Pharma, y'all. Remember those guys? The Sacklers? Remember that giant heroin spoon that sculptor built outside of their offices, out of their headquarters?
Yes, I remember.
Bad news, that whole situation with OxyContin being put forth as non-addictive, of course, leading to the opioid epidemic, absolutely devastating.
The conspiracy of the 1 to 10 pain scale, self-reported.
All of that, absolutely. All of that. Very, very tricky stuff coming from the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma. But they, were forced the Sackler family to leave the board of Purdue Pharma. Purdue Pharma did declare bankruptcy. The Sacklers no longer are able to be enriched by any activity from the company moving forward. And now a deal has been made, or Purdue Pharma has submitted a settlement plan, including up to $7 billion of cash from the Sacklers themselves and their personal wealth. And as under the deal, the family members, just jumping off with the AP's reporting, estimated in documents from 2020 and 2021 to be worth $11 billion, would give up ownership of the company in addition to contributing money over 15 years, with the biggest payment up front. Okay, $11 billion in net worth collectively. It's just kind of making me think about what's going on right now with the stock market and with the loss of value of certain very, very, very wealthy individuals. It's like if you're worth $15 billion is coughing up $3 billion of your net worth, like that big a deal. I can't even imagine what $1 billion even looks like or feels like. It just seems that after a certain point, people are just like hoarding their gold, in their castles.
Well, I mean, gold is a tangible asset, though, and this is when you get past a certain threshold of of currency or the concept of currency. You're talking about ideas. You're talking about articles of faith. This is very non-Freedom City, I gotta say.
That is so non-Freedom City.
Yeah, so it's not giving Freedom City.
It's really not.
But Noel, this does sound like at least some sort of accountability. When I was reading these statements, I was seeing a couple of asterisks, up to $7 billion, which is not the same thing as $7 billion.
No, it's true. It's true.
And none of the Sacklers are facing any criminal charges. Like no one's going to jail yet.
No, not that we've heard.
Okay.
And, to me, that would be a more appropriate punishment or some kind of actual. That's my point, I guess, is like if you're worth that many billions of dollars, and going from 11 billion to just 4 billion, if you are coughing up that full 7 billion, sure is a big hit, but also you still have $4 billion, which is more money than even makes sense to me. So it just kind of feels like, to your point, Ben, these articles of faith, is it really a huge sacrifice that's being made by these folks that are directly responsible for loss of lives and livelihoods and ruining families?
Well, what money goes to preventing this from happening again?
That is a question.
Does that make sense?
Does not seem to be being addressed.
Like how could you? I don't know. How do you prevent a corporation like that?
Well, the damage is done.
Family from generating something that causes so much harm.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I understand you now, because there are two related or Venn diagrammed but distinct avenues there. The first question is, how do we prevent that specific company from doing a thing, right? Or other companies? Is there a preventative precedent set? And then the second thing is, where does the money from a settlement go? That latter question is a little bit easier to answer because I believe we discussed previously when this settlement was first starting to, coalesce the idea of similar to like tobacco companies in those big settlements. They had to fund public awareness campaigns. They had to fund, resources for addiction, the resources for medical information, things like that. They're not quite defanged, but they're very dull canines when it comes to the bite.
Sure. I mean, yeah, but it's also like one of these things that I think ties into what we were talking about with freedom cities and the idea of deregulation, which seems like more the order of the day rather than further regulation, because that would kind of be the thing that could prevent other companies from doing something like this. And, if there is this effort to scale back any kind of oversight and regulation, then I don't think there's any way that this isn't going to happen again. And not to mention that, the damage has been done. They began this epidemic, in the 90s, and it very much, kind of started toppling the dominoes leading up to where we are now with the fentanyl crisis. Because that, drug and the proliferation of that drug, if you think about it, is just a continuation of the availability of hard opioids that then when they were harder to get because of regulation and issues with OxyContin, a lot of people pivoted to heroin.
Well, it was more affordable too, right?
100%.
Especially if you don't find, a pill mill in your area or your doctor. This happens in the military too, when people get prescribed painkillers after an injury in the field. You know what I mean? And they come back, and eventually, unfortunately, that's a tale that predates OxyContin.
That's true.
Emergence onto the market in 1996, right? The idea is that people would end up being, through one circumstance or another, not always their fault, they would get hooked on some very serious substances, and they would be physically dependent upon those. So you have to have something like that. What are you going to do when the official doors close? You're going to find another window into the house.
I thought a piece of television that did a really good job of telling the story of the human cost of this whole thing was Dope Sick, which I think was based on a memoir of some kind by one of the doctors that was portrayed in the series by Michael Keaton. I think that's right. But it really does show not only how the sales people worked and the information they were being given and how they were able, these pharmacy reps were able to go out to these, hospitals and pitch their drug as being non-addictive, but also how that trickled down to regular folks who were prescribed it legally and then ultimately just became completely strung out. I think it's a really well done show. And I do recommend it if you want to be reminded of the damage that this family did. So I don't know, Matt, does that kind of answer what you were talking about? Like, what can be done? Is it even possible? Like, I just feel like with the climate that we're in now, it's feeling less and less possible. And this feels at the end of the day like a slap on the wrist to me.
Well, any of these corporations can develop a drug, right? That they can then test themselves and then bring in the regulators and pay some of them off and then make their way through and create something that becomes just as bad as this. All of the money, I mean, there's a breakdown on the AP News article that you linked to, Noel, that it does show exactly where the money goes. And, $210 million to the lawyers of local governments who've been fighting this battle for how many years now? Money that is going to go to individuals, but it'll probably be between $3,000 and $48,000.
And to health insurers.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A trust for Native American tribes that were affected. There's incredible stuff where that money will go.
I didn't see this infographic, Matt. What a really excellent breakdown this is on the AP. I didn't realize that. So that's cool. At least they are paying, some sort of reparations to affected communities that I imagine would go into various treatment programs and at the very least, counseling and stuff like that. Because that stuff just isn't available.
But ultimately, this is money, and it's stated within that article to fight the opioid crisis.
That's right.
So it's money to fight the giant problem that the corporation created in the first place.
Well, then that's very positive.
It's positive, but ultimately, it's trying to fix the thing that is the crap show that we're already in.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
So, I just wish there was money that was going to somehow setting up a way to penalize an organization that looks to create something as addictive and damaging as that drug was, right?
I'm with you.
I don't know.
I don't know what that looks like,
that.
though. I think I'm with you, and I will say too, there's a certain amount of this that I don't know. The dollar amounts do seem meaningful. Like if you're talking about $140 million for trust for Native American tribes that were affected, infants affected by neonatal abstinence syndrome, 114 million. That does seem like meaningful dollar amounts that could make a difference. But to your point, it does start to feel a little performative because it's like way after the fact. And is any amount of money enough to fix what Purdue Pharma hath wrought?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what, $3,700 as the minimum, right, for an individual victim? That's enough for maybe a funeral, maybe.
With the cheap casket, yeah.
Well, but up to 48,000, is that worth the life of somebody that was lost due to this stuff?
No.
And if you break down $778.8 million to individual victims, that's what it equals. 3,700 to 48,000, depending on who you are and how you were affected.
Well, there's that update. And yeah, I think it was an opportunity to catch up on just how messed up the whole situation was. So I will just leave you with one more story. This one, it's pretty wild, y'all. It reminds me immediately of that episode of The Twilight Zone, Terror at 30,000 feet, I think, where it was like William Shatner is being terrorized on an airplane. He already has like horrible anxiety about flying. And then he sees this like gremlin on the wing and he just, basically is losing his mind throughout the course of this episode. Something very, very similar happened out of our state of Georgia in Savannah. A passenger absolutely went ballistic, physically violent behavior, lashing out at crew members, at fellow passengers, due to what would appear, at least as described by this individual, as some form of either demonic possession or belief that there were demonic forces present on this flight that had followed this individual. The individual in question is named Delonge Augustin. He's 31 years old, and on a flight leaving American Airlines flight from Savannah, Georgia to Miami, he began to convulse and shake. Initially, a lot of the attendants on board thought that he was having some sort of medical emergency, like a seizure. But he, in fact, it was later determined, believed that a demonic spirit had entered the cabin of this aircraft. He, kicked and punched folks on the plane. One of them, he kicked so hard in the chest that a flight attendant, actually tumbled, and flew across the aisle into a window on the other side of the plane. This is all according to an arrest report. There's a quote from Savannah Solomon, who's a special agent with the FBI, in this New York Times piece about it. Augustin's choices appeared purposeful, though difficult to describe. After a certain point, he swallowed his rosary beads. Purposefully, claiming that later that it was a protective means to guard him against the demonic forces on board. And I mean, everything about this just is like, feels like something you'd see in a film, and it's very scary. And it turns out his sister, when they were detained, said that they had been fleeing Haiti due to spiritual oppression of some kind, oppressive forces that were following them and that they were trying to escape from. The words in particular were to flee religious attacks of a spiritual nature. His sister was told by Mr. Augustin to close her eyes and pray because Satan's disciples had followed them onto the plane, and the Legion did not want the Augustins to make it back to Haiti. And that's when he swallowed the rosary beads, and he referred to them as a weapon of strength in the spiritual warfare. Only about 8 other passengers were on the plane. It must have been one of those short little hopper, puddle jumper type planes. And no one was seriously injured. The crew apparently acted very efficiently and quickly. He is facing charges, most of which are misdemeanors, battery, obstruction of law enforcement, and 1 felony count of criminal property damage. There have not been any statements from a lawyer representing Mr. Augustin. So, yeah, what do you guys think about that? That's It's a real horror show there.
That's an intense situation where it feels like the personal beliefs of the family affected a lot of other people. And also some kind of situation. It's interesting. There's a quote in the USA Today article that you posted here, Noel, where the family of this man who's experiencing all this stuff says, what was it? The quote was, she was surprised that he had hurt anyone because, quote, he hurts evil. So like he is a spiritual warrior of some sort in the belief of the family.
It just feels as this is also a mental health story. And we know there's a lot of intersection between hardcore spiritual beliefs and, mental illness that can kind of synergistically affect one another and create sort of like a whole new situation.
Mental health struggles are very much real. And we do know that there's something about the contained environment of a plane that can, I don't know, we don't hear the stories about the plane flights that go well, where everybody on the plane behaves. We hear, people who maybe are having a mental break, maybe hallucinating. It is going to be a story to keep an eye on. And I wish the person and their family the best.
Oh, same. No question. I mean, it does. It breaks my heart in a way. I mean, this is obviously someone who has a very strong spiritual belief, and if you want to take what his sister is saying at face value, doesn't seem like he's someone who would typically lash out and try to injure people. So my heart goes out to them as well, and definitely something to keep an eye on. But let's pause here, take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsor, and then we'll come back with one more piece of strange news from Mr. Frederick.
And we've returned. Computer, generate 80-foot tall version. I'm just joking. Have you guys seen that clip?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, no? Okay, you should watch that. You should find that. Just search computer, generate 80-foot tall version of Daisy Ridley with a full bladder. Okay. Generate lawn chair and a pair of goggles.
All right. Okay. I'm on it. Thanks, Matt.
It's wonderful. Okay. Let's talk about being stranded, you guys, having no way out. Like if you're on that plane that we just discussed, right? Just there's something occurring and you cannot escape physically.
Sure. Or like being in a freedom city that you're born in.
Oh, yeah. And you just don't know anything else outside of it. And perhaps the perimeter is patrolled by robot dogs with giant weapons.
Lasers. Yeah, freaking flamethrowers, at least.
You can leave after paying a reasonable fee.
It's like the Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like.
You can't leave. Or, being in space or being in a place you can't walk away. It reminds me one thing, just a quick note here, Matt. One thing that I think shocks a lot of people when they're traveling internationally is some countries charge you a fee when you arrive, but then some other countries charge you a fee to leave.
Oh,
were you aware of that? Yeah.
Did not know that.
Now, so hey, that's a really great point. There is definitely a fee to leave the International Space Station once you get up there, because and it's not just a little fee. Well, you don't have to pay it necessarily, but somebody does to the tune of millions of dollars. So back, this was last year, just before the summer, maybe it was late June, early July, when we talked about two astronauts that went up to the International Space Station on the very first, very exciting Boeing Starliner spacecraft. It was the first time that humans were going to be on there, actually traveling up to the ISS, and they did it. They made it there. But once they got there, Boeing realized, there's a lot of problems with our Starliner craft here, so we can't actually send you back the way we wanted to, within a couple of days' time there. So you're going to need to hang tight, and we'll figure out the problem, and then you'll be good to go. That turned into a couple of months. And then a couple more months. And it turned into from early June 2024 to this week. Well, actually last week, as you're hearing this, when two NASA astronauts, Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, finally made it back to Earth, but not via a Boeing craft, via a SpaceX craft. this is just an update, guys. There's a ton of writing about this, and it's big in the news. Like, oh my gosh, the astronauts are back. We did it. Hurrah. And then it's being politicized just because of the fact that SpaceX is the company that got them down.
I see.
Right. It's being stuff out there. The previous president did it wrong. The new president did it right, and all this other stuff. Ultimately,
the president of Boeing or the president of the United States?
Who knows? The president of Freedom Town, Red, White, and Blue Land, and all that stuff. But it does. None of that matters. What matters is the two human beings who are awesome astronauts made it back to Earth. Yeehaw!
Yes.
It's cool. Two other astronauts came down with them, Nick and Alexander. Which is cool, and they made it out. Everybody's safe, and a bunch of dolphins. Apparently, a whole pod of
them
I saw greeted them.
I loved it.
It's just nice. That's just nice to hear.
Folks, tell us what you think about this, because all right, here's my theory, Matt, Noel. Are those dolphins going to come back and say that they saw a UFO?
Thanks for all the fish.
I hope that they are currently conspiracy squeaking right now. This is real. We saw it. Also,
conspiracy squeaking. Sorry,
yes,
it's good.
Well, it was the biggest crash we've ever heard, right? And then we went and checked it out, and there's a bunch of creatures on it.
And why won't dolphin government tell the truth about what's going on there at the top of the water?
Yeah, what were those appendages they had that had little tiny appendages on them? Weird. So anyway, that's a cool story, guys. We're going to jump to another form of being stranded that we've talked about on this show before. Traveling out to the frozen wastes of Antarctica and existing on a research station, and what it's like to know that you have to wait for a very specific ship to make a very dangerous trek out to where you are. And then you have to take a very dangerous trek out to where that ship is in order for any supplies to come in order for any people to arrive or to leave. Let's just say, I was going to use the word precarious. It's a fragile existence, right?
It's a bottle episode, especially because there's
a bottlenose episode.
Yes.
Because there's such a small group.
Yes. So imagine that you are one of 9 people existing on a far-flung research station in Antarctica, and the only way in or out is by ship, and the only way to get to that ship is to take basically a small. They don't call them snowmobiles. They call them something else, but a small snowmobile out to a larger vehicle, and then take that slow, large vehicle down far, far away to where a ship could arrive. Imagine somebody, one of the other 9 people with you, is getting real violent and making threats, like threatening lives. And you're stuck in, it's a fairly large station, the one we're going to talk about, but it's also very claustrophobic. There's not a lot of large open spaces there. And on the other side of the wall, every wall is just snow and negative 30 degrees Celsius weather.
And H.P. Lovecraft monsters, Mountains of Madness. Yeah.
Yes.
We're talking about Sinai, right?
Yes. The Sinai 4 base that's in Antarctica. It is run by South Africa. It is officially their base. And there was an email sent to a journalist from one of the people who is currently staying on that base saying that another team member had physically assaulted a colleague and threatened to kill another colleague. This email also alleged some sexual assault. That is a little weird because South African officials came through and said after investigation that specific instance of sexual assault was not correct, but we don't have all the details. That is being kept by whatever investigation was made there. We do know that there was an individual on that base that did seem to become violent both in words and in actions. And it just reminded me of some of the films that we've seen over the years. It reminded me of the psychological place you are in when you are in a far-flung place like that, feeling like there's no way out. There's nothing you could even do. What am I going to do? Send an email, which is what this person did, right?
Right.
Please help via email. It just doesn't seem like you're going to get any help anytime soon.
Especially the closest other physical base is like 190 miles away, right?
Yes. So you could, I guess, escape if you wanted to and attempt to make it to the other place, but the chances that you make it there safely are not great,
especially this time of year.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's not a great time of year because everybody on that base is going to have to stay there until I think December. They're locked there basically until December
because the hemispheres have opposing seasonal shifts. So
yes.
Right now in the very lowest part of the hemisphere, not to be too normalizing of the northern hemisphere, but in Antarctica right now, the weather is turning increasingly hostile for travel.
Yes.
You're snowed in.
Yes, unless a corporation or country or group decided to spend a ton of money and send a ship out there to do some kind of emergency evacuation or emergency intervention, which again, just like it's not quite as expensive as, the whole SpaceX saving them and all that stuff out in space, but it's pretty close when it comes to just the expenses that someone would have to incur to save you.
And the dangers also. There are very, even if you have a state level entity doing an exfiltration on this, they're still going to be rolling the dice a little bit.
Exactly. So guys, all of this is making me think about being somewhat stranded here on planet Earth. Because in both cases, the individuals on the Sinai Research Station, the people who are out on ISS, they made it, or the concept, right, is you make it to safety. You make it to a place that feels maybe more like home, that feels like I'm no longer in danger. We're currently, all of us, if you can hear this, existing on planet Earth, right?
Yeah, it's the first spaceship when you think about it.
At least that we're aware of. Right. And it's making me think about more of that stuff out there, right? Connecting it back up to space. And there was this documentary that really caught my eye. I've not seen the film yet. I've only watched the trailer. But when I watched the trailer and then did a little digging, it reminded me of the first time we talked about the Disclosure Project, Stephen Greer's thing that he put together out in Washington in 2000. This concept of bringing together as many individual human beings that have true access to government programs, especially those special programs that we've talked about on this show before, where only a couple of members of Congress sometimes, only a couple of senators sometimes even know that they exist. This documentary, it's called Age of Disclosure, brings together around 30 human beings that have real access to these programs like ATIP and programs like the ones that followed ATIP that are happening right now that are looking at unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is what they call it now. And they are coming forward in this documentary and saying, yes, non-human intelligence exists. It has been here for a long time. The technology has been here for a long time. We are currently in a Cold War with every other country on the planet, especially the United States and China and Russia. And that Cold War is all about taking this crashed technology or technology that has been encountered that is not of this world and somehow reverse engineering it. And they are saying that the first country or superpower that successfully reverse engineers it will be the next dominant hegemonic power on this planet.
Ooh, and they're not saying, by the way, I love that you're pointing this out, Matt, because it's something we pointed out previously. No one has said definitely extraterrestrial. The confirmed phrase that is being used by a lot of people who are experts in their fields is non-human in origin. And that's a hell of a umbrella phrase.
Well, some of the folks in there, I think they use the aliens word.
Yeah.
In this documentary.
No.
In the doc? Okay.
Yeah.
In the trailer, at least. Yeah.
Well, from what I'm reading about the documentary, so people who were at South by Southwest this year were able to see it. That's where it premiered. And the interesting thing to me, guys, is that there appears to be bipartisan support when it comes to the two-party system in this country for more money being thrown at this concept, for more transparency about this idea. You've got people like Marco Rubio.
From earlier.
You've got
yeah.
Little Marco?
Yeah, the current Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. You've got Kristen, I don't know how to say her name, Gillibrand.
Yeah, Gillibrand is what I've heard.
She's from New York. She's a senator. You've got there's several other like lawmakers from both sides of the aisle who are saying, hey, we need to do more with this thing. This is really important. And then you got people from the intelligence side, from the Pentagon, from people who are career Pentagon officials coming forward and saying, yeah, this is absolutely real. It's time for us to take this seriously and tell people, because we've been keeping it secret for so long. It's always, in a lot of these documentaries, it's talked about as in, it's the alien thing, right? It's the concept of aliens. Oh, there's all these possibilities with aliens. What this is focused on, at least to my understanding, is this arms race, essentially, that we're all locked into.
Because it's a defense threat at this point.
To everybody. And everybody wants the new thing, because whoever gets it first, whoever drops that technology first, wins. At least according to the folks in this documentary. I don't know, I just want to put that out there for anybody who's listening. What do you think about all of that stuff? What do you think about everything we've talked about on this episode today? You should contact us.
Yes, there are many ways to do so. You can take your local UAP over down our way. Just drop by. You know what I mean? Send us a blurry photograph of yourself, Bigfoot style. By the way, there's also a move. I don't know if I told you guys. There's a move to make Bigfoot the state cryptid of California. So go big.
I support
F.
that.
Yeah, we're on board with that.
You'd think it'd be Oregon, though, honestly.
You know, hopefully it's setting a precedent.
Fair enough.
Right? So maybe,
Yetting a precedent.
There it is. So you could contact us with your take on all of these stories we discussed, recommendations of other stories you feel your fellow conspiracy realist will enjoy in an upcoming episode. How do I do that? You're asking yourself. So glad you asked. You can call us on a telephonic device. You can send us an email. You can find us on a variety of platforms on the old internet.
It is the question, in fact. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook. With our Facebook group, here's where it gets crazy. Get in on the conversation. Tell us your thoughts. Share memes and witticisms with your fellow conspiracy realists. You can also find us at Conspiracy Stuff on X, FKA Twitter, and on YouTube, where we have video content galore for you to enjoy. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show, and there's more.
We have a phone number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. It's a voicemail system. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know within the message if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in 3 minutes, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities who read every piece of correspondence we receive. Be well aware, yet unafraid. Sometimes the void writes back. As a matter of fact, tune in if you are an Australian conspiracy realist. We have a fun conversation coming up for you in our weekly listener mail segment. And, don't feel like it has to be long. Don't feel like it has to be short. We don't clip creative wings. Do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So join us out here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.